Mom, here's a letter from Grandpa. The day my father-in-law, a wealthy man who had always snubbed me, died. As I was preparing for the funeral, my 4-year-old daughter, who was exploring the house, handed me a white envelope. The envelope was indeed addressed to my name. My stepfather, who has always hated me, wrote me a letter. When I opened the letter, what I found was a shocking fact that I could not believe. After reading the letter, I impulsively called the police. When the police officer arrived 15 minutes later, he was stunned and muttered, "I'm sorry, but I can't believe it." It's too late. My name is Letha Boyley. I am 32 years old, and I am raising my 4-year-old daughter Mary. Although Marielle is a bit of tomboy, she attended kindergarten and grew up to be a good, honest girl. I met my husband Duke at the real estate company, where I worked when I was single. I was just an employee when Duke, the vice president of the company, took an interest in me, and the company's president was my father-in-law. In other words, Duke was the president's son. Thanks to this, Duke's income was quite high, and we were financially well off. We have a good relationship with our family, and our life is smooth sailing. But I had one big problem. My father-in-law, Perkin Boyle, who lived a short distance from us. My 75-year-old father-in-law is a wealthy man who has been involved in various businesses in addition to being the president of a real estate company. My mother-in-law was killed in an accident a year before we got married, but she has been living alone in a mansion near our house ever since. It seems that my father-in-law did not like me. Doak had told me that he had a bad heart condition, so I was worried about him and often visited him at his house, but he tutors me every time. "Stay away from me. Get out of here." I was often told to stay away from my father-in-law's house with his harass attitude. Even when I went to his house, he wouldn't even make eye contact with me. One day, this happened. Father-in-law, Doak gave me some snacks as a business trip souvenir. "Would you like to eat?" I brewed a cup of tea with a smile and put the fine confectionery on the table. However, my father-in-law glared at me and strode over to me and briskly brushed the tea away. I screamed as the tea fell over and spilled. However, my father-in-law grabbed the confectionery and smashed it into the trash. "Oh, father-in-law, what are you doing?" I protested, but my father-in-law said, "I don't want this. Just go home," and he pushed me back and kicked me out of the house. Then, when Marielle's 4th birthday was approaching, I said, "Father-in-law, we are going to have a birthday party for Marielle soon. Would you like to join us?" I asked my father-in-law timidly, but he yelled at me again, "Don't invite me to such a silly party." He yelled at me again. I remembered that my father-in-law looked at Marielle in a kind way, and in fact, he never said anything mean about her. That's why I invited him to my birthday party, but he refused in such a way. In the end, Marielle's birthday was celebrated by me, Doak, and me. However, soon after that, I received a thick registered mail for sending cash from my father-in-law. There was no letter or anything attached to it, but I wondered it was meant as a birthday gift for Marielle. What in the world was your father-in-law thinking? I have no idea what that man was up to. To be honest, I had a hard time with my difficult father-in-law. When I honestly told this to Duke, he looked troubled. My father has always had a twisted personality, you know. I appreciate your concern, but I wonder if I've done something to make them hate me. No, you don't. Anyway, he's difficult. You don't have to get too involved. Okay. I took Duke's words to heart and stopped visiting my in-laws so often. For some reason, only Marielle, who is very fond of her father-in-law, would beg to see her grandfather, which was a problem for me. Grandpa is very kind. He would pet me and even secretly gives me sweets. But I can't imagine such things from my father-in-law's usual attitude. I don't remember my father-in-law ever being strict with Marielle, but I just let her off the hook, thinking that she was just saying what she thought was appropriate because he was a child. And even if my father-in-law was really nice to Marielle, I would be the one who would be yelled at and harmed, so I was reluctant to go to that house. However, one day, while I was leading such a life, a shocking thing had happened. My father-in-law suddenly passed away. According to the housekeeper who found him, he had already gone at home when she found him. When Doak returned home with the news, he turned pale and mumbled, "Dad seemed fine when I saw him during the day." I was upset, but as his wife, I had to be as helpful as possible. Doak was going to the police station to see to the visual confirmation, so I took Mariel to my parents-in-law's house to prepare for the funeral. I was busy looking up relatives to contact and who to contact, but Mariel, who had a curious and unruly personality, began to explore the in-laws by herself. I told her, "Don't do anything dangerous," and prepared for his funeral. Then, after a while, Mariel came running to me. "Mom, here's a letter from Grandpa." I looked at Mariel's hand and saw a white envelope in her hand. It was addressed to Letha in my father-in-law's handwriting. "Where did you get this, Mariel?" "I found it when I was exploring the closet in my grandfather's room." Mariel replied cheerfully and went off to continue her exploration again. "My stepfather, who hated me, wrote me a letter. What on earth could it be?" I opened the letter and found a shocking revelation that was hard to believe. As I read it, I felt myself turned white. With trembling hands, I turned to the second page of the letter and read it. "I'm grateful to Letha for taking care of me. Mariel is also my sweet granddaughter. I'm sorry I had to be that way to keep you away, but the time we spent together was such a blessing to me. Thank you so much." Such is the end of my father-in-law's letter. I impulsively called the police with it clutched in my hand. I held my racing heart and waited, and 15 minutes later, the neighborhood police officer arrived. And when he finished reading my father-in-law's letter, which I handed to him silently, he mumbled in a voice that sounded as if it was about to disappear, "Oh, it's too late." I asked the frustrated police the reason for his words. Actually, I was also consulted by Mr. Perkin. The police, whose name is Russo, was a familiar face to my father-in-law, and whenever he met him, they would make small talk. He told us about a consultation he had received from my father-in-law. It was about my mother-in-law, who had passed away 6 years earlier, and all I could do was stand there with my eyes wide open in shock. "I'll do whatever I can. You should get a hold of yourself." With these words, the police officer returned to the police station. I was now alone, and with trembling hands, I was rereading the letter from my father-in-law when I realized something. There was another piece of paper in the envelope. Just as I was checking the contents of the letter, I heard the front door open and realized that my husband had returned. I quickly hid the letter and managed to keep a calm face as I greeted him. "Welcome home. How was the visual confirmation?" Apparently, the reason my father became like that was because he had a chronic illness and mistakenly took a medicine he shouldn't have. He said, that's how he had his heart attack. Well, it was an accident. Oh my God. It's a shame that my father's carelessness could have caused all this. "Letha, I know you're going to have a hard time with the funeral and all, but I'm counting on you." "Yeah, okay." Duac says this as he undoes his tie, as if he is tired. As I gazed at my husband, I clenched my fists and secretly made up my mind. I had to make sure that the regret of my father-in-law written in this letter would be avenged. 2 days later, on the day of my father-in-law's funeral, my father-in-law had few relatives, and the mourners were all from the company. But when I saw how many people mourned him, I realized that he was in fact a man who was loved by many people. And that night I stayed up all night working on a certain task without Doak and Mariel, who were sleeping in the other room. No. The next day, Doak and I and Mariel returned home for the first time in several days. Doak glanced at the trash cans, which were full to the brim, and muttered to himself, "I've been so busy that I forgot to take out the trash. I'm sorry. Today is rubbish day. I'll take it out right away." "No, you're tired. There's garbage in the reading room, so I'll take it out." Doak had never volunteered to take out the trash before. Doak grabbed a garbage bag and headed for his study. I followed him, trying not to make a sound with my footsteps, and through the crack in the door of his study, I witnessed what I had imagined. And as soon as he left to take out the trash, I took out my cell phone and made a call to a certain place. I stopped Doak, who had just returned from taking out the trash and was about to get dressed and go to work. "Hey, Is there anything you want to say to me about your father? Duak was busily getting ready for work and would not make eye contact with me. What? Nothing. I don't have anything to say, I said quietly, clenching my fists tightly. No, I want to talk about what caused your mother's disappearance. Why are you talking about my mother now? What are you suddenly going to say? Duak seemed a little upset, and only at this point did he finally look at me. I got a letter from your father and I know everything. Even the resident advisor was consulted by your father. Dok's eyes widened in surprise, and I began to tell him what I had heard. What the police had been told by my father-in-law was that Dok was not his mother-in-law's biological child, but a stranger who had been adopted by his mother-in-law. He also told me that his mother-in-law had died in a suspicious accident soon after the adoption, and that his father-in-law had always suspected Dok. The letter said the same thing. Doak is receiving a legacy from the loss of his wife. There is no doubt that he adopted her for her money. When I finished, Dok's eyes widened as if he was upset, but he soon broke into a half-smile as if he was mocking me. With my father gone, the company is in a flurry of activity. You're about to become the wife of the company president, aren't you? Why don't you stop talking nonsense and try to support your husband? I couldn't help but yell out loud when I heard it. What are you talking about? The president's wife. Don't be silly. Duke was startled by the devilish look on my face. Before he could talk anything back, Marielle, who was in the next room, yelled out, Whoa, police cars, and there's a lot of them. Hearing this, Doak turned pale. Oh, you don't mean you called the police? Yes, I had rushed to call the police on my cell phone before the garbage truck arrived after confirming that my husband had gone to the dump. Your faith's letter said, after my wife I will be the next turn. And if I ever suddenly go to the heaven, it will surely be because of Dok's trickery. Doak said, That's all you called the police for? You have no proof. I called the police as soon as I saw you throwing away the pills that caused your father to be gone in the study when you said you were taking out the trash. You have proof that I gave him those pills? The pills were mine and had nothing to do with my father's case. Duak lost his usual calm demeanor. He snapped and yelled at me. I silently confronted him with the screen of my cell phone. This is footage from the surveillance cameras your father had planted all over the house. That the third letter I found after the police had left, he said, I had put surveillance cameras in the house just in case. If anything happens to me, I want you to check it out, and it was written how to check it out. I had spent the night checking the cameras while Duke and Marielle slept in the other room on the night of the farewell ceremony. I checked and found a perfect shot of you in the kitchen putting pills into your father's drink he usually drinks. Of course, I will submit this to the police as evidence as well. My husband shouted, Stop. My husband was so furious that he turned red and tried to take the phone out of my hand. But at that moment, the front door opened and many police officers rushed in. Hey, I found it. I heard a voice saying from the dumpster. We need to talk to you about Mr. Perkin Boyle. Can you also tell us about the drugs we just found in the trash? Behind the detective who was pressing Duke with a stern face, there was Mr. Russo, the police, standing there with a straight face. I am sure he was the one who encouraged the detective to do so. Duke became furious and shouted at me. If you had just kept quiet, you would have become a very wealthy man. Why are you doing this to me? At that moment, in my mind were the words of gratitude my father-in-law had left me in a letter, and the kind look he had given Marielle came back to me. I checked the surveillance camera, and while I was in the kitchen preparing snacks, I saw my father-in-law sitting on the living room sofa, lovingly stroking Marielle's head on his lap. My father-in-law really did love Marielle, as she said. To treat such a kind man like that, I can never forgive him. This is a revenge for my father-in-law. Atone for your sins. Damn it. Doc stared at me without any sign of remorse until the very end, and then he was taken away by the police. Doak was later convicted. After interrogation, he confessed that he had targeted his father's property. The case against my mother-in-law is also being reopened, so he will not be coming out of the prison for a while. I asked for a lawyer and was able to successfully divorce Doak. I have no intention of ever having anything to do with that horrible man again. When it became clear that Doak had taken my father-in-law's life, he lost his inheritance rights, which meant that Marielle, the eldest of the daughter, would receive his estate. The company was given to a raided party, but thanks to my father-in-law's huge inheritance, we will have no trouble making ends meet in the future. As the best I can do, Marielle and I visit my parents-in-law's gravesite every year and pray for him every day,